We'll begin now, so I will start recording. So thank you for joining us, and welcome to one more of our series of webinars in 2019. My name is Enrique Mendizábal. I'm the director of Think Tanks. And today I'm going to be hosting and having a conversation with an old friend and colleague, Renata, who is now living in Switzerland, but back in 2017 completed her PhD while she was working for a Brazilian think tank. And there are many think tankers out there who are currently doing a PhD as well. And struggle with challenges that she struggled with, and I'm sure addressed and was successful in addressing. But they are very common, and so what we thought would be interesting for one of our webinars is to ask her to share some of her experiences of having worked in a think tank while carrying out a PhD and having lived through it. So as usual, these webinars, Renata will share her experience, and then we'll have a chance to ask her a few questions. If with those who are online right now on the webinar and would like to ask a few questions, there is a chat box available, and if you can use that, I will pick up the questions and share them with Renata at the end. This webinar is being recorded, so we will be sharing it later on as well. So, Renata, over to you.
Okay. Hi, hello, everyone. Hi, Kiki and colleagues from the Think Tanks. I have a presentation, so let me try to share my screen. Or no. Ta-da-da. Let's see. Share. Screen. So, yeah, I think it is here.
Perfect.
So, this is the first time I'm going to talk about, this topic, about my experience of pursuing a PhD and trying to conciliate that with a think tank job. It took me 4.5 years to complete the PhD. I already had a master's degree. And during the PhD, I worked full-time for 1 year at a think tank. After that, I was engaged in specific projects with different think tanks for 2 years. And then I actually quit my job and spent 1.5 years focusing exclusively on my studies. So I'll provide an overview of these different situations, these different phases, and I will try to extract some conclusions and lessons based on my experience. Just before I start, I'd like to say that this is very much a personal experience, and I do not expect that my conclusions will necessarily fit or be useful to other people, but maybe they can provide some insights. So let's start. I applied for a PhD in 2012 when I was working full-time as project coordinator in a think tank in Brazil. I was happy with my job, and I wasn't sure if I actually wanted to do a PhD, but I had done research during my master's and I enjoyed that, and I had been in conversations with a university professor who would go on to become my thesis supervisor, and he was always telling me that a PhD would open many doors and allow me to grow professionally. So it seemed like something that could be useful in my career. I applied to 2 different programs, and in the end, I chose to enroll in the program where this professor, the one that I was already in conversations with, where he was teaching. There was something particular about this graduate program which I chose, and is that it didn't offer many scholarships. And because of that, many students had to work to be able to afford to go to school. So this is usually not a good situation, but actually it turned out to be an advantage for me, because it meant there were evening classes, and also it meant that professors were usually flexible and understanding of the students' situation. So here's kind of my first lesson, is that when trying to conciliate work and studies, it is good to choose a PhD program that is accustomed to students who work. So you are not the exception, you're actually part of the norm of the students. And because I was working full time, there were times when I would arrive late to class, when I didn't do the required readings, and sometimes I would have to request a deadline extension to complete a home assignment, or I would have to negotiate an extra assignment to compensate for missing too many classes due to work. And my assessment of that first year trying to conciliate both things is that being a student did not affect my performance at work, but it affected my performance as a student. I became kind of like an average type or even below average student. Everything in the office seemed urgent and needed my immediate attention, while the PhD was a long-term project. It could wait until the weekends, or even it could wait until holidays or something. So here is my second conclusion, is that it's difficult to be an outstanding student if you're working full-time. You can get by with flexibility and understanding from professors, and with a lot of extra hours in the evening and in the weekends. So after 1 year trying to conciliate the two things, and also feeling a bit bad about leaving my studies in second place, I managed to switch from my full-time job to a project-specific assignment. And that was really good to me, because I didn't have to be in the office every day anymore. And that really freed up time for me and gave me extra hours to work at the PhD. And at the same time, I kept my affiliation with the think tank, and I also kept part of my paycheck as well. And this was the time also when I was engaged with the own think tanks project. So this is the third lesson which I get, is that think tanks are flexible organizations in which you can be hired for specific projects. And negotiating a consultancy agreement with a think tank may be a good option, because you keep the affiliation and some source of income. So I started to work as a consultant for the think tank and also for my university, doing policy research related to my studies. I was able to keep this type of engagement of doing consultancy work for think tanks and also working on my PhD. I managed to do that for 2 years, and I had great opportunities during those 2 years. I was able to publish, to travel, to represent the organization, to deliver presentations, to meet people, to expand my network. That was really good. And this is another conclusion I take from that, is that being a PhD candidate while working at a think tank can help you raise your profile within the organization. So supervisors may give you high visibility opportunities that you would not otherwise get. But eventually, you have to move from being a PhD candidate to actually getting your PhD, and the student must graduate, and that's actually the difficult part, which meant writing a thesis that represents an original contribution to your field of studies. And I felt I couldn't do that while keeping all these other side projects. So I decided I needed to quit everything and focus on doing my own research and writing my PhD thesis. And for 1.5 years, that's what I did. Since I did not have any source of income anymore, I actually started applying for scholarships. I managed to get a 6-month scholarship, but rather than that, I was living off my savings for a year so I could complete my thesis. And at times I questioned my decision of giving up a full-time job to become an unemployed student. And it felt that I had made a questionable choice, and that by prioritizing my students, I was basically making a vow of poverty. But you have to keep your eyes on the prize. And in my case, I had a clear idea of what that prize was to become a specialist, an expert. And that actually in the end would bring me back to the think tank world. After submitting my thesis to my committee, I got back in touch with the first think tank where I used to work, and they offered me a job. Not really my old job back, but something slightly better. I took it. I also started applying for other jobs, and about 10 months after defending my thesis, I got a job at a research institute with the United Nations, and that's where I've been for the past year, and I really enjoy it here. So there were times when I could not make sense of my decisions, but now from a distance, I can see the good things that came out of that effort. And as I said in the beginning, this is very much a personal experience, but some issues may be of relevance. So I'm happy to, you know, zoom in and discuss more specific topics of this journey. I'm happy to listen to comments and questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Renata. That was very useful. I just want to remind people who are online right now, they can share some of the questions they have or ask a question they have on the chat box. Let me ask you a kind of more of contextual question, or I'll start with a little comment. So I think one of the key things is when I come across think tankers in think tanks in developed countries, say in the US, in the UK, following this sort of Anglo-American tradition of think tanks, you know, one doesn't get to find, we don't find too many PhDs there. The kind of the approach to a PhD is not necessarily something that think tanks are looking for. They're looking for quicker, short-term analysis, rather than the in-depth attention that a PhD holder would probably have on a particular subject. So having a PhD doesn't necessarily give you that advantage in a London-based or a Washington-based think tank, in my assessment. But in many other parts of the world, it does. In many countries, it is how you get promoted, or is how you get chosen to more senior positions or given certain responsibilities. And certainly in the UN, having a PhD is a key thing. So I wonder if many of your other PhD peers, while you were doing it, had also been working in a think tank or were thinking about going to a policy research institution, or they just had other expectations of what to do with that PhD.
I agree with you, Kike, that having a PhD was not a precondition for working at a think tank, and at the end of the day, it wouldn't make that much of a difference. But as I said, like it gave you a little bit of advantage in certain opportunities. Some members of the board who are academics and who have themselves a PhD would actually show interest in your work. So it made a bit of a difference in terms of status within a research organization, but it wasn't something that was in a job description or something that was required to work in a think tank. As you said, I think for the UN, it can make a difference because these are very competitive posts, and then it adds to your experience, and it can be something that it's important. This is my opinion. And in terms of the other people that were working with me, that were studying with me, I think maybe most of them had the expectation of joining a university and becoming a university professor. I think in that career, a PhD really changed it really matters. In our field of being in think tanks, it can make a difference, but it's not that straightforward, I would say. Does that answer?
And having said that, no, yeah, sure. But having said that, it's not necessarily a precondition. What are the things that you think you learned during your PhD that have helped you now that you're back at a think tank?
Okay, what did I learn? I mean, I learned about conciliating different priorities. So the experience of having to go to work and then also having to structure a work plan for my free time, because that's what I was doing. I was doing like full-time work, and when I would get home, I would have like a third shift. I would stop for half an hour, eat something, and then get back in front of the computer and work on my studies. So it really helped me organize my time management, organize my time, and also organize different priorities. And this is kind of something that can be applied in other jobs. When you have to deal with so many different priorities. And also the thing about the PhD is that a long-term project. So when you're working at think tanks, sometimes, most of the time, your timeline is shorter. So it added this to my experience that I can manage a research project which is longer. And I think sometimes you have this type of projects in think tanks as well. These multi-year projects.
Here where I am. So having realistically speaking, what kind of support would have been, or what kind of support would you have appreciated from the think tank you were working at while you were doing your PhD? So what kind of support from them would have allowed you to stay working with them for the remaining of the PhD?
I think they were very supportive. I mean, I said from the beginning that I would do my best so that the PhD would not derail my work or affect my performance. But there were times where I needed to take some afternoon off because of some event related to the university that I needed to attend. So they were, this is very type of practical support in terms of flexibility in working hours to accommodate a different academic project. So this was something good that they did. And the other thing that they did is that they kept me affiliated as, I think it was associate researcher. So instead of being a project coordinator, that I was there every day managing several initiatives, we managed to switch to a different type of engagement. It was a research associate kind of posting that they found for me. And that meant I kept being part of the think tank life and the think tank world, but my responsibilities were, they decreased in a way that allowed me to focus on other things as well. And it was pretty much my decision to stop with that because at some point I realized, I mean, some people, I think they can do the PhD and keep side projects and part-time work all the time throughout the period. That was not the case for me. I felt I actually needed to stop with all the side projects and focus on getting this thesis done. And it was again my decision to cut the other projects. But overall, the think tank staff were very supportive, and I also had a lot of support from my supervisor and the university professors who understood that I could not sometimes dedicate 100% of my time to the studies. And I think this is something it's more common in developing countries, because perhaps in the developed world, people get into PhDs with full scholarships, and then the expectation is that you devote 100% of your time to the studies. But in countries which don't have this tradition of funding and this availability of resources, which was my case in Brazil, You could see, you know, professors were really kind and understanding, and they knew you had other things to do and you needed, you know, to support yourself. So I feel I had a lot of support from people. There could have been more support in terms of funds. For instance, to finish my PhD, I stayed, as I said, 1 year without any type of funding, and that was hard. And but I think this is not exceptional. I think in Brazil this is becoming actually very common, that people have to make financial sacrifice to contribute to science and to get their studies, complete their studies.
I have another question. So one of the fears that researchers have when they're doing a PhD is that you sort of, for a period of time, you're going to go away, and you're going to you know, stare straight into a computer or to a pile of books, and so it might be a year or 2 years until someone hears about you again. And if you've spent a year or 2 years without an income, then one of the things you want after that is to get a job rather quickly. And certainly in the world of think tanks, it's useful to be visible, right? Think tanks will appreciate if they're hiring a think tanker who has a, you know, fairly active social media profile, or at least a profile. They don't have to start selling from zero. Do you have any advice on how to you know, keep connected to the policy discussion around the subject that you're studying, or to certain networks in a way that might not distract your work, your PhD?
Yeah, I agree. I also had this fear that you become invisible, hiding in the library, and nobody will remember you anymore. And it was also something I felt bad, because I would meet people and they would be, how are you doing? And every time I only had the same answer. I'm working on the PhD. Yes, I've been going a lot to the library. I felt like I didn't have anything new to share for some time. But at least in my field, I managed to publish a couple of short pieces throughout the period of the PhD. And I think this is good, because even if it's just like a blog post or in a not really well-known journal, something just to get your ideas out there. And then you can actually send this via email to your contacts, so they know you're still alive and you're still thinking and you're still publishing and you're still have ideas to share. So I think this is one way of keeping visible, is to keep contact, sending material. And the other thing is, on a more personal level, you just keep with the social engagements. You know, you still keep going to lectures in think tanks. You still keep asking people for coffee or for lunch. It's kind of like a dual track. You maintain the engagement by putting your ideas out there in terms of short pieces, and you also keep the social part of the networking alive. And actually, I really enjoyed that, you know, getting out of the library and, you know, going to a talk on a different topic, just to clear your head, and also, you know, so you can exchange some email addresses and get some contacts and tell people that you are what you're working on. And then when I was about to finish my PhD, when I was confident about my thesis, I actually reached out to the think tank where I used to work, and I said, you know, I'm about to finish, and I'd appreciate if you could have coffee with me and we could talk about what you are working on right now, what are the priorities, and if there is a possibility that I can collaborate and participate in the work again.
Thank you. I also, one of the things we recommend is that while you're doing a PhD, you're reading a lot, so and you're taking notes, and those notes can become a short blog. They can become a review of a book or a review of a paper that you might be able to publish. You've already done it, so might as well send it to someone who will put it out there. and so people will know that that's what you're specializing on. And Sean asks a question I think is relevant to this: is what I mean in your case, was the area of research in your PhD closely linked to what you were working on at the think tank, or do you know of any of your peers who had made that connection, or is it more normal, is it more common for PhD students to work on something entirely different? Or would you advise people to just try to closely align their PhD thesis to the work they are doing at the think tank?
So when I was working as project coordinator, I oversaw different initiatives related to international relations, and they had focus on sustainable development or focus on trade, or sometimes would be normative, like democracy issues. So it was a wide range. I wasn't a specialist at the think tank, but for the PhD, I had to focus on something very narrow and specific. In my case, it was governance for nuclear energy in Brazil. So that was not a topic that I would usually cover. It would usually appear in the think tank. The think tank was structured in more broad issues, for instance, energy security. And then there would be a link with what I was doing. But I would say that in my case, the think tank had a broader umbrella, that they covered, and I was doing something very focused. In my case, it's good that while you were doing the PhD, you managed to extract some policy lessons of what you're looking at, and maybe you can have this very clear. I think this is a good thing. When you're doing your PhD, it will have a lot of theoretical implications, and you have a lot of like normative framing and this type of thing. But it's good, you know, if you have, this is an exercise that people do, right? If you have the opportunity to talk to the foreign minister today about your research, what would you tell him or her? Usually it's a him, but if you had the opportunity to talk to the Minister of Energy today, what would you tell they? So when you're doing, if you want it may be that you want to do a PhD that's purely theoretical, and that's fine. But if you want to do something that may bring you back to the policy world and may bring you to the think tank world, it's good to have these questions in mind, that your research actually have takeaways that are important for the policy world.
Thank you. And many of these questions, I should know, come from Founty, who's one of our On Think Tanks fellows. And she, one of the things we've been discussing is around the peer support network, and she's been working hard to get one off the ground in Senegal. And I wonder if this is something that you had in Brazil, or wished you had, sort of a support network among other PhDers who were also struggling to keep up with work back at their think tank or other jobs, or not, or just sharing some of these lessons, some of these advice. Was there such a thing, peer support network? And if not, who did you go to for support? Who else can you go to for support if not your supervisor?
I don't think I had something structured around the peer support network. But I was fortunate to have great colleagues at the university. So we had like a research group, and people who are more advanced than you. I think it's good to talk to them. So for instance, someone who is a postdoc at your university, someone that has been through it, and just to vent, just to like say whatever, and even, nobody will have a great response to your problems. I think that's my experience, but it's good to have someone to share things. And I found that at the university with more senior researchers. And actually, when I became a bit more senior at the university, I kind of felt lonely, not having the dialogue and the exchange with people who were ahead of me. But in addition to that, your friends, you know, and your colleagues are always, in my experience, have been good. And a lot of the times I would talk to older like professors, and I would say, oh, I'm struggling with this and that of the thesis, and they would say the best adjective for a thesis is done. Don't stress too much, just get it done. So I would hear this a lot. And at sometimes I would actually just think that, yes, just let's get this done.
Great. I don't know if there's any more questions among those present. Anybody who wants to ask a question? Otherwise, I'll ask you a final question. So what would be, besides get it done, what would be the sort of key piece of advice you would give someone about to start or in the middle of a PhD while working at a think tank?
I think you have to be flexible. And I think flexibility is a word that emerged a lot when I was thinking about this, is that I had flexible understandings at work. My professors were flexible, and I was flexible with myself as well. If you don't get this deadline, I actually went and talked to professors, and I actually proposed, okay, can I write a book review and I get it published, and this will compensate for me missing class here and there. So I think this issue of flexibility and understanding, I think this is very much about, also could be a trace of Brazilian culture, because we understand that things don't always go the way they are expected to go, and people have this they are open to things changing along the way. Maybe in other cultures it's not like that, so I don't know. But for me, flexibility from all parties involved was key.
But I also think that dialogue, right, communication, what you've described is an ongoing conversation with your, with people at the think tank, with your professors at the university, with your peers, with yourself. A constant conversation about what you're doing, why you're doing it, what challenges you're facing, what could be done to address those challenges. So rather than doing, it's often the PhD life is described as being very lonely, and it's probably true. But that doesn't mean that you should not talk to anybody and explain what, kind of narrate your work so that people are aware of the challenges and opportunities you're facing, and that they don't become an emergency, right? They don't become a deadline missed once again, but they are, something that is likely to happen, and then you prepare for that. And so if you have a project back at the think tank that is also, coming head on to a deadline with your PhD draft, then you prepare in advance. You talk to both sides and make sure that they are aware of this. And, if you're doing a good job, they will certainly want to accommodate you, right? They'll want to accommodate that situation.
And sometimes I would have to tell my supervisor, okay, from this month until this month, I will not be able to work on the research because I'm busy with other commitments. So this is something a lot about planning. Also, you have an overview of the calendar, and you know where the think tank job will be more demanding when. So I know in July I have this big workshop coming up. So in June, I won't be able to look at my research. So you just plan for this type of events in advance. And then what I would say is that I would tell actually my supervisor, just be aware this time I will not be able to advance much, but I will try to compensate that on the next quarter or something like that.
Great. Well, thank you, Renata. I for one, used to think that, I used to say to people, doing a PhD while working in a think tank is not going to teach you much. But actually, if anything, besides the knowledge you gain from doing the PhD, I realized that doing a PhD while working in your think tank will give you the skills you definitely need to work in a think tank successfully, to manage conflicting timelines and priorities, to manage the expectation of people who think their work is more important, to live kind of in between slightly two different worlds of policy and academia, to manage life and work and study, etc. So I think certainly a recommendation to go for it, but also to use it as that learning experience, right? Not just to get those three letters, or that doctorate, the sorry of your name, but to get the lessons from working through a number of challenges, and delivering at the end. So that was very, very interesting. Thank you very much, Renata, for joining us today, and all the others who've joined us online. And as I said before, this has been recorded. We'll be sharing it, and I encourage you to share them with your colleagues. And there will be more webinars coming up. We'll be talking about communications, about political party think tanks, about research excellence in academia, and many more. So I hope to see you online again. I hope to see you in Geneva, Renata, in February. All right. Thank you very much, and have a good day, a good weekend.
Thank you.
Thank you.